A super quick note before we jump in today. You might notice some audio disturbances in this episode. We're working on it and appreciate your patience. Just wanted to give you a heads up about that. Now, let's get into it. I'm going to start this episode by taking you back. Come on a little journey with me. It is fall of 2017, just about 3 years after my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I had spent the previous few years trying to focus on one day at a time and doing whatever I could do to support my mom from 3,000 miles away as she went through various chemo treatments. But by 2017, I was often left feeling alone, untethered, and confused. I knew that I was experiencing something, but I was lacking a word for it. I found myself wanting to use the word grief to explain it. But in our society at that time, grief referred to the process after someone dies. I knew there was no possible way that I was the only one feeling what I was feeling. But then why the fuck did I feel so alone? So like any good millennial who is searching for answers, I took to Google. I started my search with pending grief. Nothing besides a few web pages discussing the well-known, yet misunderstood, stages of grief popped up. I decided to try again. Although at this point, I was feeling fucking disheartened. I typed in grief before death, and then through the magic of Google, and remember, this is before AI answers, I discovered a new term for me, anticipatory grief. My eyes became wide. How have I been struggling with my mom having cancer for 3 years now? I'm a master's level mental health counselor. I am actively in therapy, and I've never heard of this. It was that familiar feeling of searching for something for what felt like an eternity. And then finally, an answer that just fits. I felt so validated for about 2 minutes. And then the all too familiar frustration set in. When I took to Google to type in my new favorite word combination, anticipatory grief, what was displayed was this. Number 1 at the top was a link to a suicide hotline. Number 2, a minimal blog with one entry focused on anticipatory grief and the other blog entries focused on the after-death grief process. Number 3, there was a Wikipedia page with a remarkable entry of 8 paragraphs, and again, the 5 stages of grief. And number 4, a few more blogs aimed at end-of-life and hospice care. By the time I got to the bottom of Google page number 1, I was being shown websites aimed at, yep, you guessed it, the type of grief that occurs only after someone dies, as well as a few web pages about the anticipation of an elder adult dying. In a world where life-threatening chronic and terminal illnesses, in my mom's case, cancer, are so fucking common, how could there be less than half a dozen resources to explore the feelings and experiences involved in watching someone or something deteriorate right in front of you? This is where my first attempt at public grief processing was born. I created a blog titled, Waiting for Death, A Personal Journey of Anticipatory Grief. And now, the same passion and energy that motivated me to create that blog has evolved to this podcast. So, now let's fast forward back to 2025. I type in the same Google searches that I did back in 2017, and I'm filled with awe and gratitude that the page fills up with resources, blogs, social media platforms, all put out there by people who have the same passion and motivation as I did about a decade ago, and still do, to expand our society's narrow definition of grief and to help people feel less alone. I'll be honest with you though. I had a wave of envy as I was scrolling through all of the amazing resources available now, wishing desperately that my 26-year-old self, in those dark moments of searching for something, anything, could see the resources available now in 2025. So today's episode, my good friend Kelly is coming on to talk about what it is like to live in a state of anticipatory grief. And we're going to be dedicating this episode to my 26-year-old self and anyone else who's ever desperately took to Google to feel a little less alone but came up empty-handed. This one is for you. This is Nothing Happens for a Reason. Thanks for coming on, Kelly.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. We're going to talk about this concept of anticipatory grief and anticipatory loss, which I think is such a important discussion when it comes to the grieving community, and something that maybe isn't talked about very often. And I know that you've had experience with anticipatory grief, and so I'm really glad that you're willing to come in and talk more about it. I think we could just jump in. We can talk about what your experience has been, who's the person in your life that this concept really hits for you.
Definitely. So for me, if we just look at it in a general scope, we're all in a stage of anticipatory grief, right? It's anticipating a loss of some sort. And I think it feels more prevalent when you have that person going through something where a loss is coming. And for me, with my anticipatory grief, it's surrounded by my dad. He has a cerebellum degeneration from heavy alcohol use and has been fighting this illness, disease, whatever you want to call it, for a long time. And so it's been a long journey of ups and downs and twists and turns, and preparing myself, then not preparing myself because he's okay for now. And it's a complicated process at the same time. I didn't know anticipatory grief was, concept until I had started my own therapy and just kind of going through that process of like, oh, this does have a name. This does have a label. Like, this is actually something, right? The grief doesn't have to start when somebody passes. It can start before that.
Yeah, I remember sitting in our group supervision, and I was sharing about, and at that point, I believe my mom was kind of at the end of her illness, but hadn't died yet. And I remember talking about how important it was to be in therapy and learning, even as a therapist. It was the first time really learning about this concept of anticipatory grief, which I was very much experiencing without a name to it, and talking about it. And I remember at that point, I didn't know a lot about your story and what your experience with your dad had been, and being able to really connect in two very different illnesses, but in this really horrible transitional period that doesn't maybe always feel recognized by society and other people, or maybe not understood, and being able to connect with you over that. And referral to my therapist, who's been so wonderful, and she's the one that you started working with, that you're still working with about this. And so yeah, it looks lots of different ways, but at the core, there's so many similarities of what it can look like for somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah. And going on that too, I think a big part of not just you building this podcast, but talking about it, bringing voices to it, not being afraid to talk about grief and loss and what that means and how that feels. And both being therapists, I remember specifically working together in those case conceptualizations. Well, does this person have any grief? Do they have any loss? And so often the clinician wouldn't know. And it's we're both having a response.
Lots of memories of having to try to educate other therapists of the importance of asking about grief and loss. Yep, absolutely.
But even that, being a therapist, being able to talk to somebody about literally anything, and still this uncomfortability around talking about it and what it means and what people's experiences are. I think it was even uncomfortable for other therapists to have that conversation, to open that up. Even more reason why these conversations are important.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And not just having the language of these different types of grief that somebody can experience that isn't just a physical death of a person, and having that background is so important. But you're right. I think I still feel that within the field of people's, I think, discomfort with it, or therapists' own misconceptions about what grief is. Oh, I think their person died 15 years ago. I don't think it's present anymore. And well, have you asked, have you talked about it, and not making an assumption? Because as we know now, right, there's no timeline. And especially if we in this society where we don't talk about grief and loss and death and dying.
We're given 3 days bereavement.
Oh, yeah.
And then we have to get over it.
They're just over it, right? That's how it works. Yeah, the concept, right, of grieving in capitalism, think about a lot. But yeah, it's definitely a big gap, even in the therapy space. And I think that's why, for me, finding a therapist that specialized in grief was something I really needed to have it be normalized and validated in it, which is why I wanted to pass that resource on to you also, to be able to hold space for it.
Yeah. And that was such a life-changing moment for me, because I was just in therapy this morning and I was reflecting, coming on the podcast today and going through the timeline of everything. And I had asked her, I was like, when did I start seeing you? I've been here a while, but when exactly? And it was December 2018. And so six years at this point. This year will be 7. But even that in of itself speaks to the vastness of grief. 3 days bereavement versus going on 7 years. There's been other things that we have processed and talked about. Life continues to happen, but just being able to name finally what I had been experiencing at that point was such a game changer for me, because I truly didn't think that I was grieving.
Yeah.
At that point, I remember my very first therapy session with her very, very vividly. I was a disaster, complete mess. I went in there, I think I said 3 words, and I just cried for the entire hour. And up until that point, my dad's illness, it was very confusing. We didn't have a diagnosis for a long time. And so it was watching somebody who I looked up to and I loved just kind of deteriorate without really knowing why. Where do I put that? And so once I was able to sit in that office with her and she was able to label it and name it, it was such a validating experience of what this actually was.
Right. Yeah. Oh, so glad that you were able to have that experience. And yeah, just to cry for most of the 50 minutes and emotionally release some of that in a place that felt safe and, like you said, validating, and be able to normalize the experiences is something that I wish everyone could experience. Same for me, of hearing even that term be used. The term was new to me in my search while my mom was dying, of finding something, and I was trying to understand what I was experiencing, but couldn't find a name for it. And I remember my first 20-minute consult call with the therapist, and she named it. And I was like, yep, this person is the one I'm going to work with. She seems to really understand it. And I remember even crying on the 20-minute phone call, because I felt so seen in that. And grief is so lonely, whatever type of grief it is. It's such a lonely experience that nobody will truly understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
And even somebody who's lost the exact same person, your grieving experience is going to be different. And so it's just so inherently lonely. But there are things that we can do, right? Experiences we can have that help us feel a little less lonely. And those moments where somebody can hold our grief or validate it or normalize it, those are the moments. It doesn't take it away, but it helps us feel a little less alone in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you to you, because again, too, I think my grief was also in a denial phase of I don't know what to call this, so I'm just going to ignore it until something else happens, or I need more evidence that this is what is happening. Been a long road.
Yeah.
Navigating that, kind of in and out of it.
Are you willing to share a little bit about the history of all of this? I know you've named what the disease is and that it's from excessive drinking. And you said, for a while we didn't know what it was. And so, let's go back a little bit.
Gotta get my timeline out.
These are us organized here.
I'm so bad with timelines and years, and it all just blends together.
No, it does. I had to look at my Instagram story for some memories before recording another episode.
That's right. I literally went through my old Facebook and went through my now private albums. I just keep on there because I'm like, where else can I put this stuff?
Yeah.
But it really, it was really eye-opening, and just the phases of my dad's illness. And that was the first time that I was able to kind of look through the years, just with the lens that I have now, because it's hard.
Oh, wow.
It's hard to see it in that moment. And looking back, he started using a cane in 2012. So that's bad at math. 14 years ago. So over a decade at this point. And it was even a few years before that where a cane even came into the picture for him. So it's been 15 years, which is nearly half my life, of trying to navigate what is exactly happening.
Wow, yeah.
When I'm not around this person 24/7. I don't see him every day. I don't at that point talk to him every day. And these bigger family functions that I would see every few months. And me, a late teens, early 20s, I'm in my own world, right? I'm in college, figuring life out and figuring out what I want to do post undergrad. So, I was just in my own little world at the same time.
So even before the cane piece, even going a little bit further back, because I know your parents got divorced. At what point do you at least remember having insider awareness into your dad's struggles with addiction?
I honestly didn't know until pretty late. I think there was a level of denial happening. I feel like at that point there was a level of just kind of blissfully unaware. I think there was a level of protection and shielding from my mom and likely sister at that time. I didn't really know it was an issue until it was really bad. Because even looking back, my parents divorced when I was 14, kind of entering high school, those great teenage years. Perfect timing.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Mom and Dad.
Literally. And growing up, my dad, nothing was obvious. He would engage with us. He'd go to work. We'd all come home from school, have dinner. He would usually go out to the workshop and do whatever he did. Lo and behold, years later, I learned he was likely drinking that at that point. And then when my parents got divorced, it was a pretty big shock. They didn't have the signs of, they didn't fight in front of us that I remember. So it was a really big shock at that time. And I really think those few years after that happened, his drinking increased. Me and my sister and I, we were living with my mom. I mean, there was no custody battle, nothing. For a divorce, looking back, it went, in my eyes, it was very civil. We got to go spend time with my dad whenever we really wanted. He would come pick us up, especially me before I could drive. Luckily, they have remained civil, and, my mom still visits my dad, and I'd say they're acquaintances, but, they are cordial together, which in my eyes is best case scenario.
So divorce happened at 14. Maybe it sounds like his drinking increased during that period.
Yeah. I mean, he would hang out a lot with his best friends. One friend in particular did like to indulge in drinking. It wasn't uncommon in their relationship. And he was also living by himself. So we never know what happens behind closed doors, but I'm assuming that's where a lot of it started increasing. And just as I was looking back on the pictures last night over the time frame, I had that perspective of, he does not look good. I think it's hard in that moment to call it out and to name it, especially I was in high school. I'm like, I don't know what alcoholism was. Like, I've been relatively sheltered. And so I didn't know at that point. But looking back on the pictures, I'm like, ooh, I can see it getting worse over those years. And just in like Christmas pictures.
Like, what were you seeing?
Some of the appearances, he was very like disheveled. His face is very puffy, very red. Stories that I've heard after those events were coming true to in my head that painted the picture a little bit more clear. But I think, like I said, there were so many layers of me that didn't either want to see it or just truly didn't know it was happening. And maybe a little bit of both, probably. And I do think that's a big part. I think some of it subconsciously was self-protection, and subconsciously I was happily, blissfully unaware, right? Because I could focus on me, I could focus on what I was doing, and figure out where I wanted to go, my life post high school and post undergrad.
Very much allowed you to focus on your schooling, your career, moving across the country.
Also, not without cost. The cost of sitting in that first therapy session, because I either subconsciously or chose to be unaware, it caught up with me. It caught up with me in the sense of like, I don't know what I'm feeling. I'm really anxious. I'm really scared about what's going to happen. My mind at that point was thinking worst case scenario, very catastrophic thinking. Like whenever I thought of my dad, I thought of this visualization of, something's happening. He's not healthy. He's going to die. And moving came with a lot of guilt and the shame at some point.
That's something else that, despite our stories being different in so many ways, it is another kind of thread of similarity too, right? You're from New Jersey, you're also from the East Coast, maybe from New Hampshire, both being out here in Oregon, and having, at that time my mom was still alive, having a lot of that guilt and shame too of being so far away. And I remember I almost dropped out of grad school following her diagnosis, and I remember just being like, how am I supposed to fucking finish grad school or stay out here when things aren't going so well, and what do I do with that? And really difficult thing to be dealing with. I'm so far away, but also your dreams of what you were doing and pursuing was also important. So balancing that for sure is hard.
Yeah. At that point when, I made the decision to come out here, my dad was living on his own at that point. He was using a cane. Things were progressing, but there was a period of time there where he was pretty independent for the most part. He lived by himself a decent chunk of years. That got harder, obviously, as time went on. But when I decided to move, I had a conversation with him, and I expressed what it felt in like leaving and what that means. Guilt. And, he was always he still is, very supportive with the decisions that I make.
What did he say to you?
I don't remember the exact words. It essentially was, you had to follow what you feel like is the right thing for you to do. You said that I can't make a big life choice based off of him or what may or may not happen. And that was one of the things that helped solidify.
Wow, so powerful. It sounds like what was a very straightforward conversation you had with him. And curious, we've bounced around a little bit at different phases of this timeline. But between like him starting to use a cane and your decision to move out here, did he have a diagnosis yet?
No.
No one knew what was going on.
So I moved out here in 2014. I did try to go home and visit frequently, and I still try to. I don't think that there's been a year where I haven't made the trip at least twice. I want to say.
Yeah, you're right about being intentional.
Yeah. That was something that, like, when I moved out here, I really wanted to do. Obviously, back then, I could do it a lot easier. I just hop on a flight for, like, a long weekend and go hang out for a little bit. But, yeah, so in 2014, I moved out here. Him and my sister actually came out and visited me the summer of 2016.
Wow, okay.
Which was really cool for me. I was living in Northwest Portland at the time, and that was definitely like a once in a lifetime trip. I knew it was going to be hard for him. He was still progressing. I mean, that's what the disease is. It's progressive. There's no cure for it. It just, it happens over time. So I remember at that point, I lived on the second floor, and right outside the stairs, he was still taking stairs at that point. It was a little sketchy though. Like I remember kind of hearing, because he was also a smoker, so he would go outside to smoke his cigarettes, and I remember just like waiting to hear the topple.
Wow.
Just because of like the unsteadiness. Luckily, didn't happen. But there were other points in that trip where it wasn't necessarily easy either. So I would say that was like one of the times he was still in a decent place, but starting to go downhill a little bit. So then after that trip, so that was 2016, he got his official diagnosis in 2017. And once he got the diagnosis, my sister was able to get a lot more help for him.
What's the diagnosis again?
It's cerebellum. It's a form of ataxia. So cerebellum degeneration. So it attacks the cerebellum, which is for of movement, gait, muscle memory, those sorts of things.
Okay.
So
the diagnosis came in 2017. You said we could get help now that we have a formal diagnosis. That's great.
yeah,
What came after that?
my sister did a lot of this, right? I wasn't there. And that part I'd also worked through a lot of guilt. Now, I was just filled with fear and anxiety and worst case scenario, and my family hates me because I moved across the country and I'm not there helping, and I'm a shit person for that. Like, what do I do with that? And so one of the things in therapy that has really helped me is figure out where I can take action, being 3,000 miles away. And that looks very different than the action that I could take being 3 minutes away. So after that point, I really tried to increase the communication with my sister. We are really able to get on the same page, have an ABC plan of when this happens to dad, this is our options. So like when that time came, we knew what we were doing. We didn't have to think about it. The burden wasn't just on her to kind of come up with those decisions or conclusions. What were some of those scenarios? If he ended up in the hospital again, and he can't return home, then what? If he passes, what do we do? Having almost like a game plan. I tried to go home as frequently as I could, and like especially in times of kind of need, like if he was in the hospital or for a few years though, there it always felt like he was in a hospital or rehab. So we got the diagnosis in 2017. After that point, he was still living on his own. He started using a wheelchair in 2018. So after he got the diagnosis, I would say it progressed quicker. Then goes 5 years of waiting and confusion of what is happening without the diagnosis. So I felt like once we got the diagnosis, that's looking back where things started really taking a turn. Once he was in a wheelchair, he never really got out of it. Again, he's still wheelchair bound. Before he'd be able to like get in and out of cars and whatnot, he'd take showers and stuff on his own. He's lost all of that over the years. It just takes all that autonomy and independence away. So fucking hard. Yeah. So in the 2018, he was in the wheelchair. He was still in his own apartment. I would say he did pretty well at that point. I mean, he had somebody coming in and doing physical therapy with him because there's no cure to cerebellum ataxia or cerebellum degeneration. It's really just management of the symptoms to not get worse. So like PT was always something he was doing. Somebody would come in and like take him to the gym. And so I would say for like 2 or 3 years, he was, maybe stable is a strong word. For him, it was stable. Of course, as time went on, it got worse. He started falling a lot more in his apartment. I remember one time he was on the ground, a long time before anybody had kind of gotten in contact with him. I can't even remember if my sister had found him or we called. I honestly can't remember. I feel like I blocked so much of this out. But I remember after one bad fall, my sister with my support too really encouraged. Just like one of those like button things that he wears. Yeah, I can't remember what they're just like a fall kind of thing. It's like if he pushes it, it rings 911. You know, he has like he had speakers throughout his apartment. So he had gotten one of those for a while. It had gotten to a point where my sister would text him in the morning and he would have to text her back and I would text him at night just to make sure that he hadn't fallen. And my dad, he's always had like a very dry sense of humor, like very sarcastic. He's like, "What, Kel? I'm still alive. I'm fine." It's like, okay, we're more traumatized.
Yeah, I think also really obviously, we're talking about impact on you with your dad's illness and the progression and deteriorating. But yeah, and the person who's going through that, how hard it must be to also be like losing their own autonomy and
Absolutely.
knowing, yeah, my daughter's checking in on me is, of course, like necessary at this point. And also how frustrating, so hard.
Yeah. And again, too, like when he would fall, it's not right that classic commercial of like, I fall and I can't get up. No, like sometimes he'd end up in the hospital and then he'd have to go to rehabs and stuff for like 2 to 3 weeks. I know there was at least 2 stints in rehab, maybe 3. He would go there after the hospital because in the hospital, he's not moving. He's not getting up. He's not doing anything. So he would lose all just like that coordination and he'd have to retrain the muscles to try to live independently again. I remember one of the first times that I brought Teach home to meet my family. My dad was in the hospital. I can't remember for what. And I remember we had to dress up full PPE, like full blue gowns, blue everything before COVID. And like that was one of the first times that Teach met my dad.
It speaks to that secondary loss off of the primary loss being the illness and secondary loss or having this moment of bringing like a partner home for the first time. And there's grief with that. Your dad's declining health and this kind of big, it sounds like, production. I don't know if that's the right word to, get in PPE. And that's the first time that your husband was able to meet your dad.
Yeah. And so after falls got more frequent, at some point towards the end, he got really used to hitting the button and calling, and he began calling for reasons other than falling, like more basic ADL stuff. He ended back up in the hospital. And at this point, I was actually home again. These things always happen. And again, this is like another universe moment to where I was home and I could be a support person because when I'm gone, my sister was doing everything. She was grocery shopping. She was taking him to appointments. She was paying his credit card bills. Like she was doing everything. It's too much. And so at that point where he was calling me and my sister, she was really trying to advocate to the doctors at the rehab at that point of like, he can't go. And I don't know if you've ever had to deal with rehabs and those kind of facilities. It's impossible to get a hold of anybody there. These places are very understaffed. They don't have enough resources. They have one social worker for a lot of patients there, and these people are there short term. They're only there a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks max. So it's kind of like a revolving door. And the things just aligned where it kind of felt like they listened to us. And I think one of the doctors at his last one was there when he was there 3 years prior. Like, what are we still doing? And me and my sister had a lot of conversations about moving him into like assisted living. Again, this was one of the options. This is what we do at this point.
The contingency planning, literally.
So me and her spent a good portion of 3 or 4 days just going all over South Jersey. Mind you, our dad was 63. 64 at the time. And so we're in these facilities. We're in the 90. Everybody, it's clear that he's going to be one of the youngest, if not the youngest person there. So how do we, number one, convince him to do this, right? Because if he goes home, he's going to die. And secondly, how do we be okay with this decision, knowing that he's still young? One thing that I read about cerebral degeneration is that most people will live in their 60s with it. He's still mid-60s. Like, he still has, I mean, we don't know how much longer he has, and that's another part of anticipatory grief too, which is hard, right? Because there is no timeline, just is what it is. And so one of the things that was important for my sister and I was, we want a place that, like, we feel comfortable coming to. We don't want to go in somewhere where, like, it just feels uncomfortable or feels like a hospital or like a nursing home or something like that. Actually, the first place we toured was the one that ended up working out. It just felt very homey. It was just kind of like good energy. It did not feel like a hospital. Was everybody old? Yes. But it was somewhere that we felt comfortable going to. And I think even after that, we toured, like, I want to say, gosh, 4 or 5 maybe. And we kept going back to that one. And so the next part was, okay, how do we convince him? Because at the end of the day, we can do all this work. And also, he'd be like, no, I'm going home. I just want to go home. And that's kind of where he was, like, in the rehab at that point. But he didn't fight us. I was shocked. I think he knew, or at least that's kind of what I told myself. Maybe make myself feel a little bit better still about the decision to put him somewhere. But I think he knew that it was time. What comes up for you when you're thinking about that time? Sadness, but also relief. Yeah, my gosh, relief for him that he would be around other people. He lived by himself for a long time. Relief for my sister that she could take a step back. Yeah, because she was the primary caretaker. Like, she had taken him in at a certain point, which I know was really stressful. Obviously sadness too, right? For him losing just like that autonomy and independence of, like, not going home. Yeah. At that point, it's like the perceived autonomy, right? Like, the disease had, at that point, robbed him of the actual autonomy. Moving out of his home was kind of the last piece that was at least maybe giving some false perception of autonomy. And it sounds like he was needing more, for sure. Yeah. And so she luckily went straight there, not without hiccups, of course, right? When you're working with 2 different facilities and money, and I think one of the fears was that if he couldn't go directly there from the rehab, if he went back home, he wouldn't go anymore, which, looking back, luckily, everything worked out so that he did. I had to come home at some point, and then I remember me and Teach, we flew out, I can't remember how much later, probably a few weeks, not that much longer later. We went out just for a long weekend. My sister and my brother-in-law did most of the cleaning up of the apartment, and me and Tish, we flew out and just helped clean up the last little bit of it. At that point, the prior visit, it was all focused, like, on assisted living. And, like, there were so many conversations with my dad and his siblings. Like, it was a stressful visit for everybody. And, you know, I remember we said, we just don't want to talk about it. Let's just have this weekend. Obviously, it's focused around finishing up cleaning the apartment, but we also got to go through pictures and, like, old things and stuff. That was, with the circumstances, it was a good weekend. And my dad has never really asked about the apartment. Really? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I feel like he knew for himself that it was time, because he didn't really ask, like, well, there's that. Where's that? Like, he didn't fight us on any that sort of stuff. So, like, some level of acceptance within him about it, or acceptance mixed with denial. We both know that well, too. It may be easier for to just not ask about it. So, what year did he move into the assisted living?
22.
2022.
Yeah.
Okay, wow. Like, still kind of in COVID, but
Yeah, I was pregnant.
you were pregnant during it. Okay. Yeah. Wow. And then, so it's now 2025. So how's he been doing for the last few years?
I think he does like it there. The staff really enjoy his company. They say he's like one of the best residents.
Hopefully no one that is also in the facility is listening to this.
Yeah, I mean, because that was one of the things too that we told the people, that he could be stubborn. He kind of like, he's one of those personalities where they need to like tell him to do something to do it. And so, obviously he still has autonomy in choosing what he wants to do on a day out basis. He doesn't play bingo or anything like that, but he enjoys his watching MASH, Yeah, it's awful. But yeah, he's good. I mean, I'd be lying if I said my heart didn't drop every time I see the assisted living calling. You just never know. Most of the calls are, oh yeah, like he fell getting out of bed, but he's okay, things like that. But you know what? I'd rather have him crawling there
To help him. So, yeah, so he's still
chugging along.
Yeah,
From my memory, no hospitalization since moving there.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
What a big relief, yeah, for you. But like you said, especially your sister, who's physically in Jersey and takes care of a lot of the things around your dad. How has the relationship shifted for you and your sister since your dad's been able to move into the retirement facility?
Yeah, I'd say it's good. Me and her have definitely gotten closer the older we get. Growing up, we were 4 years apart. So it was always like we were just kind of like in different life phases growing up. When I'm like an annoying 10-year-old, she's a 14-year-old. And when she's graduating high school, I'm leaving middle school. So it was just very hard to, I think, connect on that level. But, I do think through all this, at least in my opinion, we're the closest we've ever been. Lovely not having every conversation be based around how dad's doing or what's going on, or I'm stressed out about this, or this is now an issue, or I'm upset with this person. Whatever it is, we've been able to just like really focus on our lives and still taking care of certain things for that, because that's still very much there. But we're able to talk about other things, which is nice.
Yeah, opening up the conversation to not just be in crisis all the time is big. Something that I think, appreciate about how you've been able to show up in some of those struggles and difficulties with your guilt about not being home and having your sister take on so much is, when you've talked to me about that in the past, especially before your dad moved in to the assisted living. I appreciate that you and your sister are able to like have conversations about it. I remember at one point you telling me, saying, I told my sister, like, just let me know when it's time for me to come home. Let me know when you like need to tap out or when you need a break. And knowing that might have been part of something you might have to do, and being able to be open about it. And like, it makes me think about, I was kind of on the other side of it in my experience with my mom. Like, it was really important for me to be home, especially towards the end. And my sisters, it wasn't as important to them, not to say our relationship and our love for our mom was like any less. It was just like something that I wanted to be a part of, especially like the very end dying process. And I didn't really know until the night that she died how much resentment I had that my sisters weren't there with me during that period, and resentment of all the things I had taken on that they haven't. And in retrospect, being able to realize we had different needs during that time, and my needs were
different than their needs were, and that I made a decision to be there. I was making a choice to show up the way that I was. It doesn't need to be the same for everybody. But something that was really healing was after my mom died, sisters and I had a conversation, and I was really vulnerable, and I kind of broke down, and I was sharing my resentment and my anger of feeling abandoned during that time. And it was just so healing. I don't even remember exactly what my sisters said, but they just like let me feel what I was feeling, not, trying to change it or tell me I was wrong for feeling it. And I remember thinking like, I wish I had said these things months ago because it released it. And so I guess, again, kind of bringing it back to you, whenever you've told me about conversations with you and your sister, I think that you two being able to be really open and honest about your needs, sharing about that with each other is so important. And I think that anyone who's going through something similar to your story, that would be definitely, I think, an important takeaway around open communication about how everyone's showing up and feelings we're having about how people are showing up.
Yeah. There hasn't been a time yet where she felt like in her best judgment that I needed, right, to come home. There have definitely been moments where I'm like, do you feel like this is it? After talks with doctors and whatnot, she'd be able to say like, no, like I think we're okay for right now. That part of anticipatory grief of I'm looking at flights, I'm looking at I need to take off time off work. And that's still going to happen, right? He's still here, but he's not always going to be here. And I'm still working towards being prepared for when that one time that call does come and I need to go, and that's what I'm going to do. But also and I'm making an assumption, but I would assume like that's also a burden as well to be the one saying like, oh, I think it's it, but it might not be it. Or, well, I think it's fine, but that it not be fine. I think that's another point that is unfairly on her or other people like in that position as well. And so it's like making space for that.
Yeah,
part too.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you talked about that piece.
With all the pressure.
That is, yeah. I'm curious. It's my hard question, I'm not sure, but with anticipatory grief, limbo or time, waiting period, as you said at the beginning, right? In some regard, we're all on our way to death. That's part of life. And we don't know when our time's coming, but with somebody with a chronic illness, it feels more significant sometimes. And so for you, like, do you have some sort of ritual or something that you are mindful of whenever you are back home and you're leaving, the time that you spend and what you say to your dad?
That's a tough question.
I know, I'm sorry.
Not so much in what I say. Each time I leave the assisted facility, I think that could be the last time. So I always try to leave it on a positive note. We don't have like deep life conversations, right, every time. Because also another part too that makes me didn't really talk about, but just like his mental ability is going as well, obviously, with all this. But yeah, I just actually prepare every time that it's the last time. So after I leave, I typically cry in the car.
I feel, obviously, not just that your emotions coming up around it, but how hard and also maybe how important that question is, and other people who are currently dealing with something like this along with you or have dealt with it, I think can probably relate to that. When I was going back east a lot and going back and forth, especially the last few months there where they gave my mom only a few months to live, and I was going back every other weekend, it still was like anything had happened the next week and a half, and that feeling of, it's not always the words that we're saying, but the feeling that we have. And I know she felt it too.
Yeah.
I think we both left all of those with the like, I don't know if this will be the last time.
Yeah.
And then very familiar with the tears afterwards. And I usually would cry at the airport and, lots of different like looks of concern at the airport with security and TSA agents, like, what is wrong with this person? I got really comfortable crying in public spaces. Lots of tears in airports and on plane, including when I was crying on the plane. My seatmate just awkwardly didn't say a word to me, just like slid over their travel tissues to me. Again, hard to think about it, but also I think like part of this topic. And yeah. So, but it's also, too, like I said before, I think I was so in denial for so long. Just having that recognition. It's like not living in that denial anymore. Oh, this is gonna happen. No, fucking sucks, right? Awful. It's fucking awful. And it's hard, right? Because when is it gonna happen by the time I get to visit again? Right? What if I don't have time to visit again? One of the things that I am proud of myself and like how I've shown up since moving out here is my commitment going back home. One of the last thoughts I was having too of you, despite all of this, the moments that you've been able to still take advantage of more recently, like bringing your kiddo home so that your dad could meet Harper for the first time. Like that was such an important thing for you. I think your wedding is the only one I've like sobbed at. And when your dad in his wheelchair came down the aisle, and I mean, I'll never know all the things that you've been through, but what you've chosen to share with me over our friendship and the ups and the downs of his sickness and the stress and anxiety and uncertainty that's built into that, and then be able to like, he made it to a really big event and being part of it. And I just remember like the joy on his face being wheeled down. He was able to walk with you, but just having him be part of that. And again, not just big moments. And that's one of those confusing parts of long-term anticipatory grief of, well, is he going to make it to the wedding? Is he not going to make it to the wedding? Oh my God, he made it to the wedding. And so it's taken a lot, but I've also gotten a lot. Like those moments are more special than ever. And even if they're hard in the moment. So it's a wild ride. Yeah. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for being willing to come on today and share your story, which is also your dad's story. And it's going to help a lot of people with understanding, validating whatever they're feeling right now in this concept of anticipatory grief. So thank you.
So that's all for this week's episode on Nothing Happens for a Reason. Thank you for being here and listening. We'll be back with a new episode next Thursday. And if you find value in these conversations, please subscribe and consider leaving a review. It truly helps others find our community. And if you know someone who might find solace or understanding here, whether they're experiencing grief or seeking to better understand grief, please share this podcast with them. I appreciate your support deeply. Until next time.